everything in the physical world is parallel to something in the spiritual world. Everything in the physical world has a spiritual source. And you might say that just as the Torah is written in black letters on white parchment, it's not simply black letters on white parchment, but in fact, our rabbis tell us before the world was created, like any good architect, God created a plan, he created a blueprint before he created the structure. And the Torah is the blueprint for the world. So there was, in the spiritual realm, there was a spiritual Torah from which God would construct the whole world. And so just as our physical Torah is a white scroll with black letters on it, it parallels and emanates from a spiritual source, which is described as fire, and therefore it's described as black fire inscribed upon white fire. And in fact, our sages tell us that when Moshe ascended to heaven to receive the Torah, Hashem showed him the primordial Torah. He showed him this spiritual construct that appeared as black fire on white fire. Every word in the Torah was, so to speak, instructed to Moshe by God to write every single word. There's not anything in the Torah that is Moshe's own invention or innovation. And the law is that in order for a Torah scroll to be valid, it has to be copied from another Torah scroll. A scribe, a Jewish person whose job it is to write Torah scrolls, a sofer, as we call it in Hebrew, cannot write it from memory, even if he has a steel trap memory and he knows every word of the Torah by heart. He's not permitted to write by heart the Torah. He has to look at he has to have open in front of him a Torah scroll. He looks, he sees, and he writes and he copies. He has to copy. He cannot write from memory. Our rabbis teach us that even Moshe had to follow this rule. Now think about it. Today, someone who's writing a Torah scroll is copying a scroll that was already written. And that scroll was copied from a scroll that preceded it. And that scroll was copied from a scroll that preceded it. And onward back through the generations until the very first Torah scroll written by Moshe himself. His scroll is the origin for all subsequent scrolls. And I should really say Moshe wrote 13 Torah scrolls. There was one for each tribe, and then there was one that remained in the tabernacle. All of the Torahs we have are copies of Moshe's Torah ultimately. However, we're to understand that Moshe himself followed this procedure and copied the words of the Torah from the primordial spiritual Torah that was black fire on white fire. From that, he wrote down black ink on white parchment, so that even Moshe's Torah was a copy of, so to speak, Hashem's Torah. The Torah originated from Hashem, and Moshe's Torah from that Torah.